April 30th, 1975 was supposed to mark America's defeat in Vietnam. Instead, it becomes the moment the United States wins. The helicopters never evacuate Saigon. American aircraft dominate the sky, and the war ends not with collapse, but with an unexpected victory. Communist forces begin collapsing faster than anyone predicted. Across Asia, governments that once feared falling suddenly stand firm. Within days, global leaders realize something terrifying is unfolding. The balance of power in the Cold War has just changed overnight. Moscow and Beijing scramble to understand a world where decades of strategy are suddenly unraveling before their eyes. But the real shock isn't military. If America proved it could win Vietnam, it might have become unstoppable. And a world where one superpower cannot be stopped might not become safer, only far more dangerous. Before we dive in, if you enjoy alternate history and deep what-if scenarios like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and drop a comment telling me which historical event you think could have changed the world the most. Your ideas might inspire future videos, and they help this content reach more people who love history. The Vietnam War was never meant to be just a regional conflict. It was one of the most intense battlegrounds of the Cold War, where two global ideologies collided through proxy warfare. Every decision made in the jungles of Southeast Asia carried consequences that stretched far beyond Vietnam's borders. When the United States withdrew and Saigon fell in 1975, it reshaped global confidence, military doctrine, and political strategy for decades. But history is fragile. A single successful campaign, a different political decision, or a shift in military strategy could have changed everything. Tonight, we explore an alternate timeline where the United States achieves victory in Vietnam and how that single outcome could have rewritten alliances, altered global culture, and quietly reshaped the modern world you live in today. The Vietnam War did not begin as America's war. It started as a regional struggle born from the collapse of French colonial rule after World War II. Vietnam was split in two: the Communist North, led by Ho Chi Minh, and the anti-Communist South, backed by Western powers. What looked like a local conflict was quickly pulled into something far larger. For the United States, Vietnam became a front line of the Cold War. Washington feared the domino theory, the belief that if Vietnam fell to communism, neighboring countries would follow one by one. Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, even Indonesia seemed at risk. Vietnam was not about territory, it was about stopping an ideological chain reaction. The Viet Cong were not a traditional army. They were guerrilla fighters embedded within villages, jungles, and cities, supported by North Vietnam. The South Vietnamese government, meanwhile, struggled with corruption, instability, and weak public trust. This imbalance turned the war into a slow, exhausting conflict with no clear front lines. Globally, the world was tense. The Soviet Union and China backed the North. NATO watched nervously. Nuclear weapons loomed in the background of every decision. A single escalation could have triggered a global catastrophe. By the early 1970s, American society was fractured. Protests erupted. Trust in government eroded. Vietnam became more than a war. It became a symbol of limits to American power. And that is exactly why a US victory would have meant something terrifyingly different, because it would have shattered the idea that America could ever be stopped. A US victory in Vietnam was never impossible. It was delayed, constrained, and ultimately abandoned not because of battlefield collapse, but because of political limits. The war was fought with one hand tied, shaped more by fear of escalation than by military capability. One possible path to victory was early, overwhelming force. Striking North Vietnamese supply routes decisively, including the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos and Cambodia, could have crippled the war before it became entrenched. Instead, those routes were bombed cautiously, allowing the North to adapt, rebuild, and survive. Another turning point was strategy. The US focused on body counts instead of territory, chasing enemies that melted back into jungles. A shift toward long-term stabilization, securing villages, protecting civilians, and dismantling Viet Cong influence locally could have changed public loyalty and undermined guerrilla support from within. Political will mattered just as much as military power. A unified South Vietnamese government, backed firmly and reformed early, could have given the war legitimacy. Corruption and instability weakened trust, turning potential allies into passive observers. A decisive victory would not have looked like a parade. It would have been quiet. Communist networks dismantled, borders secured, and Saigon standing not because of force alone, but because resistance collapsed. And that's the most dangerous part. If America had proven it could win a guerrilla war against communism, every Cold War assumption would have collapsed next.
If the United States had secured victory in Vietnam, the transformation would not have stopped at politics or military power. Cultural identity across Southeast Asia could have shifted dramatically, creating a region shaped by Western influence decades earlier than in our timeline. South Vietnam would likely have evolved into a powerful cultural gateway between Asia and the West. American universities, media networks, and corporate investments could have flooded into cities like Saigon, turning them into educational and entertainment hubs rivaling Tokyo or Seoul. A generation raised within this environment might have embraced Western artistic styles while blending them with traditional Asian heritage. Music, film, and fashion across Southeast Asia could have followed a completely different trajectory. Instead of cultural movements emerging later through globalization, American pop culture might have spread rapidly through military bases, television broadcasts, and exchange programs. Local artists might have developed hybrid styles, redefining global entertainment trends. Language could have been another quiet revolution. English might have become dominant across Vietnam and neighboring countries, accelerating economic integration and international trade. Entire generations could have grown up culturally aligned with Western business and education systems. Religious and social structures might also have shifted. Increased exposure to democratic values, individualism, and Western social norms could have influenced family structures, education systems, and social mobility across the region. But cultural change rarely happens without resistance, and beneath this rapid Western influence, tensions could have grown. Tensions that might eventually reshape Asia in ways far more unpredictable than the war itself. A decisive American victory in Vietnam would have sent shockwaves across the globe. The Cold War balance would tip dramatically toward the United States, leaving nations to reconsider their alliances. The Soviet Union, humiliated by another failed proxy conflict, would face internal pressure and strategic recalculation. China might pause its regional ambitions, forced to confront an emboldened U.S. presence near its borders. Alliances would shift almost overnight. NATO members would lean heavily on American power, while non-aligned nations would weigh the risks of opposing Washington. Regional conflicts in Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East could unfold very differently under this new reality. Economic influence would follow military dominance. Stronger American presence in Asia could accelerate trade, shift markets, and give pro-Western nations an edge decades earlier than in our timeline. Yet the most profound impact would be psychological. A world witnessing an unexpected U.S. triumph would perceive its power as nearly absolute, a perception that could quietly reshape diplomacy, military strategy, and global ambition for generations. In a world where the United States won Vietnam, the modern era would look unrecognizable. Southeast Asia could have become a network of stable, Western-aligned nations, economically booming decades ahead of schedule. Technology and innovation might have spread faster as American influence accelerated industrial growth and education in the region. Cities like Saigon could rival global hubs, shaping culture, finance, and trade far earlier than in our timeline. Alliances would also feel the shift. China and Russia, constrained by earlier U.S. dominance, might play more cautious roles on the global stage,
altering the trajectory of conflicts, diplomacy, and even the space race. Cultural landscapes would transform as well. English and Western social norms could dominate schools and media, blending with local traditions to create hybrid societies that look and feel entirely different from today. And yet, beneath this seemingly orderly world, tension simmers. Every choice, every victory carries consequences, because a single U.S. triumph in Vietnam wouldn't just change history, it would quietly shape the very world you live in.
A U.S. victory in Vietnam might have created stability on the surface, but history shows that dominant powers often face new, unexpected challenges. Absolute geopolitical confidence could have pushed America into deeper global involvement, reshaping its role as the world's enforcer. Without the psychological scar of Vietnam, U.S. military doctrine might become far more aggressive. Future conflicts could be approached with greater certainty, possibly leading to faster interventions in global crises and altering the timeline of wars that defined later decades. Inside the United States, society could evolve differently. The anti-war movement, which reshaped American culture, music, and political activism, might never reach the same intensity. Public trust in government institutions could remain stronger or dangerously unquestioned. Globally, rival nations might respond by accelerating unconventional warfare, cyber tactics, or economic competition, searching for new ways to challenge overwhelming military superiority. Because sometimes, victory doesn't end conflict. Sometimes, it simply changes where the next battle begins, and who is prepared to fight it.
History is never fixed. One victory, one decision can quietly ripple across decades, reshaping politics, culture, and global power. If the United States had won in Vietnam, the world you know might not exist. Cities, alliances, and even daily life could look completely different. If you enjoyed exploring this alternate timeline, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave a comment telling us which historical event you think could have changed the world the most. Because every choice in history matters, and sometimes the smallest victories can echo louder than the loudest defeats.